Let's now turn our attention to summarizing and displaying categorical variables. So as a reminder, categorical data is data that names categories like eye color, etc. And to summarize categorical data, we often use counts or percentages. So if I had a group of people, I would record how many of them had blue eyes, how many had brown, how many had green, etc. And I could use either that count, or I could also determine the percent of the whole and find or report that data. The counts are often called frequencies, so if you've heard of a frequency table, that is what it's all about. So here is how we will summarize categorical data. We can make a frequency table, which we'll make together in a moment. We can also make a version of a relative frequency table, which is quite often done in conjunction with a regular frequency table. The regular frequency table just gives counts. A relative frequency table gives decimals or percentages, so quite often you'll see data recorded as a count and also as a decimal or percent. If we want to summarize categorical data graphically, we will use a bar chart or a pie chart, and we'll go over all of those together. So let's first look at a frequency table or a relative frequency table. A frequency table displays what the outcomes are, and the outcomes, of course, would be our categories. And it also displays the frequency of each of those outcomes in the second column. So here is some raw data, grades and stats, totally made up. And to create the frequency table, I have created a column that has all of the different options, A, B, C, D, and F. And then I essentially counted, so quite often you'll see a column in between here where we would make a mark for B, and make a mark for A, and make a mark for D, etc. so that we know that we don't miss any of our data. Once we're done going through all of that, we would then count up how many total, so we would end up with 3, 7, 4, 1, and 0. Now notice the other table I have here is similar, but this is a relative frequency table. This one did not give the counts, but quite often you would see that column before that. So you would see 3, 7, 4, 1, 0, and then maybe a total column down here of 15. And the advantage of that is that now I know how I'm finding the relative frequency. So if I took 3 out of 15 total, I get 0.2, which I would probably record as 20%. 7 out of 15, 0.4667, which is rounded, 46.7%, etc. So you get the idea. Remember that this column should add up to close to 1, whereas this column should add up to close to 100. So I say close to because sometimes when we do some rounding, it doesn't add up to exactly 100%. And that's nothing to be scared about if it's really close. Like say I added up to get 100.1%. I'm not going to be concerned. If I added them up to get 105%, I would be concerned with that. So we've talked about how to display our data numerically. Now we want to look at displaying categorical data graphically. And one way to do that is in using a bar chart. And a bar chart can use either our raw data from the frequency table, or can use our percentage or decimal data from our relative frequency table. A couple of things to point out is that all bars must have the same width. So let's say I made D look like this. That's very confusing. Is that including F's, etc.? You always want to have everything to have the same width, and you also want a space between the bars. So there is another graphical display called a histogram, and we'll cover that in a few minutes, but that has some different properties like the bars are touching, etc. So it's very important that you're dealing with categorical data. You want to leave a space between each category, and notice I've got my categories here on the bottom and I've got my frequencies over here. This looks like the exact same picture, but my frequencies are now in percentages, but again it should look the same. The other categorical display is a pie chart, And a pie chart is great because we're looking at the relative frequency data, so we're looking at percentages. And essentially what we would do is we would take those percentages, say my 7%, times the 360 degrees that's in a circle, and that would give us the number of degrees here. Now we're not going to make any by hand, but I just wanted to point out that I would take my 0.07 times 360 if you wanted to do one by hand to find the number of degrees in that circle. But really what I want you to understand about a pie chart is that it is going to make a proportional slice for each category. So notice this is a great visual. I can see that nearly half of the students got a B in my class, whereas 20% of students got an A, 27% got a C, 7% got a D, and nobody got an F.